some of you join us, there's joy. Admittedly, though, this has been a really difficult time for many people. I think, especially for Palestinians, I want to acknowledge also the experience too of Jewish people as well. Though neither of us, Rania or I, are Jewish, and also for those of us who are trying to be in solidarity with our Palestinian, particularly our Palestinian friends and loved ones. But we want to thank you for joining. So what Rania and I decided to do, and we work together and have worked together for years now. Rania, do you want to say a little bit about who you are?
Sure. My name is Rania. I'm a Palestinian American. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I'm going to Ohio State to get my master's in public health to help the Palestinian people once I graduate with my research. And so, yeah.
Coolio. And I am Dr. Paige Rawson, and I am an ally in the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. And I came here through years of study. I was raised conservative evangelical, and so heavy into Christian Zionism, and through my own study of religion and the Bible and history, honestly, in the historical context of the Bible and the land of the Bible, right? I realized, oh, I just gave a thumbs up. I realized that what has happened over the past 75 years is colonialism. And right now it's at a fever pitch, obviously. And so we really wanted to join you tonight and talk about, particularly in the season of Advent, and talk about what's happening, and also about our, specifically because this week of Advent is a week where we're focusing on hope. We wanted to talk about hope, and in light of the current humanitarian crisis in Palestine. So, Rania, anything you want to say as I move into sort of introducing our conversation tonight and our structure?
I think you got a lot of it, and we're going to get into a lot more, so we can just start.
God. So hope, right? I've been reading a lot lately, and Rania and I have been talking about this. A lot of allies, particularly white allies, have been saying that they feel as though we have failed Palestine, and they have lost hope or are losing hope. And I think what tonight we want to do is actually talk about what hope is, and how hope, I'm thinking with James C. Scott here, has been a weapon of the weak. And I'm putting weak there in quotes. The ways that hope actually is necessary in liberation movements, and it's particularly necessary now. And that for those of us who are white and feel as though we are losing hope, one of the ways that I understand that kind of despair is in terms of white privilege. Because right, we as white folks, a part of white supremacy culture is that we sort of expect to live in comfort. We expect for things to work out. We assume that we should be happy and things should be easy and that we shouldn't have to struggle. And I think a way in which Black, Indigenous, people of color, particularly right now, Palestinians, we can actually learn from them is in the way that they have utilized hope, continued to hope against hope, when there has been evidence to the contrary. And when they had great cause for despair and for. So as a white ally, I think that it is really important for us to actually tonight take some time to think about this crisis in terms of hope, and what is happening in Gaza currently. Rania, anything you want to add to that?
Not right now.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's interesting, right? One of the things that I think about too, right, is that like white supremacy culture actually is working to keep us blissfully unaware. I mean, we're seeing this in the news right now, particularly with these Western news syndicates. There's a way in which, I mean, we're just being bombarded, and even the way that those of us who are speaking out in support of Palestine are being shadow banned right now. I think this is a great example of how we can turn our eyes, and not watch what is happening, the atrocities that are occurring right now. We'll get into that though. So the four words, rather than actually thinking about hope in traditional ways, right, as being optimism or believing that things are going to get better, right? What Rania and I decided tonight is that we wanted to look at hope through four terms, like through four lenses. Um, uh, in concert. So the first is humanity, right? I just love acronyms and also acrostics. So we're going to go. The H is humanity. The O is oppression, and so we'll talk a little about oppression and what that is. Perseverance is the P, and then E is endurance. So thinking about humanity, for me, what has been so imperative in my journey, particularly in my journey through understanding my own white privilege and white fragility and learning to be an ally who is in solidarity with other marginalized people, right? Myself as a queer person. What has been imperative is to be able to see the humanity of others, particularly people who have been represented as my other, right? So because I'm white, people who are Black, who are Indigenous, who are people of color, because I'm a Christian, people who often are Muslim, right? And I think that as I began to study and actually interact with real live Muslim people, I started to realize that the things that I've been taught about Muslims were absolutely a lie. They were stereotypes, right? And I was led to these particular biases out of xenophobia, out of a fear of others, and a lack of actual engagement with and real relationships with people who are Muslim. And I think this has also happened as we look at what is happening in terms of the binary, or this hierarchical opposition of Israel and Palestine. And what I'd like to is is allow Rania some time, if you feel comfortable, to talk a little bit about the trauma, right? Because I think if we're gonna actually have any sort of window into possibility for sympathy, understanding, or compassion, we really need to understand um, and hear from this story of an actual Palestinian American, and for about your family. And anyway, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit from your experience.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it's important to start with, talking about Palestinian trauma, that, this is my story is just one story of Palestinian trauma, and my story is, not to compare, but it's nothing compared to the story of a Palestinian living in Gaza right now, or a Palestinian living in the West Bank right now, or someone that has lived in Palestine before and now doesn't live there and they live abroad. My story is different from my mom's story, my grandma's story, my grandpa's story, my cousin's story. We all have our own story to tell and our own experiences with Palestine and what we know to be Palestine, and what's happening now and how it's affecting all of us. You know, like for me and my personal background, I've lived my whole life in the United States, but I go back to Palestine almost every summer. And, you know, this whole situation, the way it's affecting me is, a lot along with like a lot of other kids that are my age and younger than me that have had the same experience that I've had growing up here, going back there in the summer. You know, it's very hard to be watching the news, watching not even the news, because the news isn't showing us what's happening in Gaza, but watching our social media with people that we know in Gaza that live in the West Bank, and seeing how they're just being, completely like, there's no word to describe what they're going through, because honestly, as much as we have the words to describe what's happening, nothing can describe what's happening now. There's no word to describe the dehumanization of men being paraded around naked, basically, in the streets of Gaza, with the idea of lying about who they are. When we have people who live in the United States who are pointing out these men in the group saying, this is my brother, this is my nephew, this is my dad, and they've already lost members of their family. Or when we sit and we work with nonprofits, like I work with PCRF, and we're seeing, the children that come here in the US to get treatment here, and we can't connect with them at all when they live in Gaza, and we're just waiting every day to hear an update. We're praying for the day that we don't see their name pop up on the list of people that have died, or we don't see a video of them dead in the rubble between the buildings. And and not just looking at Gaza, but also looking at the West Bank, and how our families in the West Bank are just as scared as the people living in Gaza, because they don't know what's going to happen in the West Bank. They're already under so much censorship in the West Bank. If we think that we're under censorship here, posting on our Instagrams or our Facebook and our TikToks and our Twitters because our post gets removed, they get arrested if they post anything that goes against Israel. And I think it's important that, we're all seeing these videos, we're all getting traumatized, but when it's someone that looks like you, it's
Yeah.
someone that has the same name as you,
Yes.
it hits it at a different level.
Yes. Yes. I appreciate you saying that. And I want to ask you just some more questions to get just a little more granular about your personal experience being there, particularly because apartheid is happening right now. Genocide is happening right now, right? But you actually have been there and have had to stand at the checkpoints and have had to wait and have been, well, I don't want to give away your story, right? I want to talk about it, right? But so when we talk about trauma, right, and the definition of trauma that I typically ascribe to is one that's pretty broad, right? It's any event that causes any sort of distress, psychologically, emotionally, or physically, right? So and you and I have talked about this, right? Palestinians, and this is not just now, although it is especially right now, are experiencing not post-traumatic stress disorder, but present traumatic stress disorder, right? For those of us who are witnessing, absolutely, we are experiencing secondary trauma for sure, right? And we might experience compassion fatigue as well. But Rania made a great point in saying this. It is totally different when this person looks like you, when they have your name, when you have walked there, when you have been in their house, when you know, right, when these are people who are your people. And this is something that honestly, right, not many of us who are white especially can say epigenetically we've experienced that. I want to acknowledge, right, that for Jewish people, the Holocaust was a trauma, right? Absolutely, that was a genocide, and it's important to acknowledge that. It is, and it's important to acknowledge the experience of Jews as well in that sort of trauma. What I think becomes really important right now is that we acknowledge the complexity of the experience, like the complexity of the trauma for Palestinians specifically, because for 75 years this has been happening. This is just the most recent iteration that we now are privy to, that we can watch, that we can witness, because we have phones, we have cameras in our hands, and we can see this live, right? Rania, if you could, and of course I'm going on all these tangents, but if you could, can you talk about in your own body, in your own experience, what it felt like for you to be there as a Palestinian American, and to actually encounter the Israeli Defense Force, right? Who now we are referring to as Israeli Occupation Force. But what was that like for you, to experience this apartheid, this sort of segregation? And anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it's actually interesting how all this has happened after the U.S. passed the visa waiver program with Israel this past summer. Because
Go ahead.
if you know about this program, then you know that the point behind it was that so Israeli citizens can come to the U.S. without having to apply for a visa beforehand. And at the same time, the U.S. told them in return, you have to allow Palestinian Americans through your checkpoints into your airport, things that, to give us rights in the land that we previously did not have, which brings into question what's going to happen with this program now, because no one wants to talk about that. But also, this was the first time in almost 10 years that I was able to visit Jerusalem because of this. And so it was the first time I was able to go back to some of the bigger checkpoints. And, even through that, there's this racial hierarchy that they have, or like this in Israel, that they use with the Palestinians. And so you have the Israelis, they're on top, Israeli Jews are on top. And then you have the Arabs that live there, and they're, kind of the next class. And then you have, any tourist is up there with any Israeli. Unless you speak out against them, then you're, kicked to the curb, and they don't really care for you to be there anymore, and they'll kick you out of the country. And then you have someone like me, a Palestinian American, but also someone that holds Palestinian, ID. And so I haven't been able to, cross into Israel and visit Jerusalem. I haven't been able to visit Jaffa or Tel Aviv or Haifa or Akka, these different cities that are inside the occupied 1948 territories.
Yes.
And so this last year when I was finally able to do that, it's like interesting because you're sitting there at checkpoints and you have these guns drawn on you and you're sitting there arguing with an 18-year-old, someone who's 18 years old because they're required to serve in the IDF, telling you that you don't know what you're talking about and that they don't care what the US is telling them to do. You have to listen to what they have to say. And so it's interesting because the US wants to act like they're playing the
Intermediary.
yes, and that they're in control and that they're, mediating everything that's happening there when it's really the other way around. Israel's telling the US what to do and how they want it to be done and what they want done. And so, we were supposed to be able to drive through a checkpoint. Nope, you had to go to the different checkpoint and get down and walk in that checkpoint. And my experience is easy. Like that was nothing compared to what the Palestinians have to go through every single day. The ones
Yeah.
that live there that don't have American citizenship. Like I'm a lucky one. I have American citizenship that I get to go have these experiences. But the Palestinians that live there
Which
24/7
privilege, right?
without,
Yes.
yep,
Yes.
don't get this opportunity. They have to cross through those checkpoints every day. They're going through multiple security checks, and that's for the opportunity to maybe cross through. To maybe cross through. Multiple times they go through, they don't get to go through. They don't get to cross through. And even for children, and like let's go back to Gaza, for example. Children in Gaza don't have a place for them to get their cancer treatment, for example. They have to cross 5, 6 checkpoints to possibly get into some other hospital to get their cancer treatment underway, and that's without their parents, without their siblings, without their support system. Something that we are so privileged here in the United States that if anything happens, we call 911, we're at the hospital in 5 minutes.
Yes. 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 So really then what I think, like, as we zoom out and think about this, because you mentioned 1948, right? So what we have to think about is since 1948, right, the indigenous lands of the Palestinians have slowly, right, Israel has been encroaching, has been colonizing the land and slowly taking the rights, the land and resources from Palestinians. Right. And we don't, and I wish we were able to flash the map up. I feel like it just is so important, right, to be able to see what has happened since 1948. But what we're talking about, right, is the way in which this has happened over time with the support of the United States and the effect that it has had then on the indigenous people. That is a trauma, right? That is a trauma that they cannot move freely in their own homelands and that they're subjected to these checkpoints where they're ridiculed, trying to move or just to go to get health care, right? And they're told they have to perform certain duties, that they can come now, but then they have to go back and they have to try come back and forth about, right? So Rania, I appreciate you sharing some of your particular experience. I know that you've also mentioned that you too were at gunpoint and just the experience that was for you. And again, wanting to name this as thinking about trauma and the experience right now of Palestinians on the ground. And we as Americans, particularly white Americans, holding space for that, having the capacity, growing, and we'll talk about this a little more, but growing our own capacity to be able to hold that space. Again, in our own privilege, we have not had to think about this. We can choose to turn it off. This is something that they have been living for 75 years. Danya, is there anything else that you actually, let me say this, because you did mention the hierarchy. And I want to speak to this, right? Because in the 17th century, Carolus Linnaeus creates this thing called the taxonomy of races, right? And this is when we start to see scientific racism appear, where, and many of the listeners might be familiar with this. Rania and I have talked about this a lot of times, right? That white men were at the very top of the food chain. And then it progressively, and right, we have to think about this, is as closer as you were to whiteness, right, you would then have more privileges. And what Rani was talking about is within Palestine and Israel, right, these occupied areas, there is a hierarchy where the Israelis have all the power and the Arabs have only the power that the Israelis give them. Palestinians have only the power that Israelis give them. And this is really important when we think then about that binary hierarchy and we think about the way in which identity is constructed over and against, right? It is difficult to see the humanity of someone who is presented as your other as a threat to you. And this is what is missing right now. Palestinians are not being treated as humans because of an ideology that is insidious and that I believe genuinely comes out of Western European colonialism, Western European epistemologies, and white supremacy culture. And here's the thing, Rania, I want to say this and then I'd love to hear from you. But this is the thing that I think we really have to get, is that what happened in World War II, the kind of white supremacy that was utilized to justify the killing of Jews, right, was absolutely diabolical. It was evil. And that is a trauma that Jews feel in their bodies. Absolutely. It's epigenetic for sure, right? Here is what becomes difficult. It was not, this genocide was not exceptional. There had been many other genocides before, and then there were genocides after. We are in one right now. Right? It wasn't actually the greatest genocide because, as we see, the one here in the United States of America, the killing of the indigenous people in America, right? 19 million indigenous Americans were killed. But the thing that becomes interesting about what happened in Germany with Jews is that Jews experienced they were the victims of the white supremacy of the Nazi regime. And what happened after the fact, right? After these Jews experienced this, is that they themselves, through the state of Israel, are now utilizing the same sort of tactics through the state of Israel, right? Are utilizing the same sort of tactics to justify a genocide against the Palestinians. And this is where I think, and we'll shift to talking about oppression right now. It's really tricky. And I know this is very sensitive, but this is where I think Paulo Freire becomes extremely, extremely important to this conversation, right? And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but what is so important, right, is that, and he speaks about this over and over again, and this is one of the major premises of the book, is that unless the oppressed are conscientized, they will, when they gain power, become the oppressor. Because, right, the same system of power has not been disrupted. And that's what I think becomes really important when we look at what's happening, is that it is not that there isn't sympathy for Jews, I think, or for the genocide and what Jews experience. I think the problem here is that the trauma of Jews has been weaponized by Israel now to create the conditions for the genocide of Palestinians. So the oppressed ultimately then now have become the oppressor. Rania, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, you hit most, if not all of the points. The only thing I want to add that I think we kind of talked about a little bit is, one, Judaism and Zionism are not the same thing.
Yes.
So that's point number one. And then also, as much as the U.S. government and Western world wants to frame this as an issue that Palestinians have against Jews, it's not against Jews. We honestly, it does not matter who it is that's doing this genocide, that has been, committing this genocide for 75 years, that's been taking part in the apartheid regime for 75 years. We would still be reacting the same exact way to you, whether you're Jewish or not. The biggest point that has to be made clear is that we are anti-Zionism, not anti-Judaism. And if you can't get that point through your head, that's number one. You're never going to understand what's truly going on here, and that how this all comes down to white nationalism, colonialism, all these things that you were mentioning. If you don't get that point through, point blank, we are not anti-Judaism, we're anti-Zionism. Palestinians, Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived together side by side for thousands of years before any of this happened. and it was Great Britain that decided in the Balfour Declaration that they were going to give our land to the Jews after the Holocaust, or not even after the Holocaust, before the Holocaust even happened in 1917, because they were the ones that didn't want Jews. They didn't want Jews in Europe. They didn't want Jews in the United States. They were the countries that didn't accept Jews after the Holocaust, and we Palestinians accepted the Jews into our land, and we welcomed them with open arms, and now look what's happened to us. And so again, this is not a Jewish problem. This is anti-Zionism. We are anti-Zionist. We do not like the concept and ideology of Zionism.
Which is, and it's important to recognize, right, that Zionism is another form of colonialism, right? It's a political ideology about colonizing, about taking over the land of Palestine. And it's really important to think about, right? Jews, like everyone else in the world, need to be protected. But the way to protect the safety of Jews is not through Zionism. There are other ways, right? There are other ways for people to be able to live peacefully together. And this is what I think becomes so important about this idea, and Naomi Klein talks about this in Doppelganger, right? The way in which the IDF, which Israel is sort of projecting the parts of itself that that are unsavory onto Palestinians. So this idea, right, of calling Palestinians terrorists, it's a distraction, right? And it's a way to justify, in fact, doing all kinds of violence to Palestinians, because, and this is really, really important, right? You can't do this kind of violence to a people unless you vilify them, unless you make them a villain. And this is where I think, the work that I've done with the Bible becomes particularly instructive, because this is something that's been happening for centuries. The way that Palestinians have been represented as the Philistines in the Bible, right? It's over and against. But that kind of binary is the most unevolved way of understanding difference, as either or. And it's actually, right, polarized thinking is a cognitive distortion. And so I think this is the thing, right? When we start to really understand and see people for who they are, listen to their stories, right? Sit with them and be with them. And rather than having sort of this defensive posture, which is absolutely both a response to trauma, and it's also another characteristic of white supremacy culture, right, is getting defensive and not really being able to take responsibility or take a look at and critically reflect upon what's happening, right? We really need to sit down together and be able to self-reflect, right, and understand what is happening with oppression. What are the ways, right, that oppression is manifesting now, right? How is it being weaponized, even, like, particularly through trauma? But one of the things that Rania and I talk about often in our work together, right, is that it's difficult to be able to express sympathy. Oh, my thumbs. Sympathy or empathy for the oppressed when you haven't known it in your own body, when you don't know it on a cellular level, right? Which is why, in so many ways, when we look at Western European colonization and we see who's at the top of the food chain, right? White, cis, het men, it takes a lot of self-reflection and work for a straight white man to actually be able to have the kind of compassion, right? That kind of compassion that is necessary for us to truly be able to move beyond these sort of binary hierarchies where someone has to have power over, right? And so I think it becomes important that for those of us who know, right, who have been on the underside, who have been marginalized, who have been dehumanized, I think it becomes really important for us to really be able to move in empathy and compassion for others, because we have the potential to open our hearts. We have the potential because we know it in our own body. We can then have compassion for and work with in solidarity together, right? So I needed to say that, right? There's also another piece of this, that, Rania, and I want to talk to you for a moment about this. Right? Typically, when people are oppressed, right, and we've seen this through enslavement, we saw this apartheid in South Africa. We've seen this with what's happened to America over and over again, right? 80% of the globe has been colonized by 8% of the globe, right? Which is Western Europe. So here's the thing that happens, and Paulo Freire talks about this as well, right? So people who are subjugated, people who are oppressed are typically either going to respond through submission and acquiescence or through violence, depending on how intense the violence is that they're experiencing, right? In an effort to resist, in an effort to be humanized, in an effort to gain their rights. And so I want to name that, because when we start to think about what happened on October 7th, and I don't know how deeply we want to go into this, when we start to think about what happened October 7th, right? Like, this was a response. If we think about the intifadas previously, and I don't know how much you want to go into this, right? But Palestinians have tried to respond in the past, right? And so can you talk a little bit about the history of Palestinians' response um, to Israel's oppression, and what that oppressions look like?
Yeah, I honestly think it's actually so interesting that, to talk about that, because today is actually, let me tell you what it is. Today is the, trying to get you the exact number, but I don't know if I have the exact number off the top of my head. Um, one second. Second.
You're good. You're good. It's okay. I think I might have a charger too, unfortunately.
What?
Charger.
Oh, okay, here we go. Today is actually the 36th anniversary of the first Intifada beginning. Which is very important to talk about,
Yep.
because after the first Intifada, we saw some peace treaties start, which was the Oslo Accords with
Yep.
Yasser Arafat.
Yep.
And, during that time, whether you agree or disagree with what happened with the Oslo Accords, there was a shift where the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO,
So,
that despite what Israel wants to tell you is that they don't want peace, no, they took the path that everyone asked for. They took the path that the United States and Great Britain and the Western world wanted, which was, let's find a solution through peace. Let's do that. And they took that stance, and they've taken that stance. And if you listen to Zumla't talk about, Hassam Zumla't talk about the PLO stance and how you asked the PLO to work things out peacefully with them, with the Israelis, they have been doing that. It's the Israelis that don't want to answer. And, I think it's important that while we talk about the history, everything, there's a quote that says, every Israeli confession or every Israeli statement is actually a confession, which is true. Everything that they say about Palestinians is not true most of the time. I'm not going to say it's not, because I don't know 100% of everything that they say, but because I don't like to listen to them, because it's all fake propaganda in my opinion. But everything they say is actually something that they've done.
yeah.
And we do know that everything that they say is something that they've actually done. And so they want to play it as the Palestinians doing it, when it's in reality it's them doing it, but to make us
We
look like
project.
the bad guy. Mm-hmm.
Precisely. That's exactly it. Is that, and that is a form of, it's also another form of gaslighting, right? It's another form of scapegoating, right? These are all psychological, like, machinations or modalities, or, right? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Yes.
No, you're good. Keep going.
Well, so the thing that I appreciate you saying that. So what I wanted, so when we talk about the intifadas, in what this was in response to Israel's continued oppression, Israel not actually working with Palestine and Palestinians for some sort of a peaceful resolve way forward. And so if we think about October 7th did not exist in a vacuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
This was an effort to try to respond to, react to 75 years of violence, and, right, that violence had escalated. So typically with the intifadas too, I think it's important to acknowledge that with these reactions, with these revolutions, it was always because the Palestinians got to a point where, like, right, when you think about Israel having its boot on Palestine's neck, right, they're struggling to breathe, sometimes very literally, right?
Yeah.
Now, right? And so these efforts of resistance, and this is what Paulo Freire would say, is this is actually an effort toward humanizing both the oppressed and the oppressor. So in resisting oppression, right, we're breaking through this system as it is and creating some room to see beyond power over, right, these dynamics of, us versus them, or right. And so I think this becomes important, as we see, sort of like, the step back and see the larger picture, not just see this as, as Palestinians being violent, and then Israel now has to subdue them.
Yeah. To touch on to that, right? Like we talk about 1948, the Nakba, the catastrophe.
Yes.
750,000 Palestinians were killed, murdered, displaced from their land, kicked
Yeah.
out. That's why we have over 6 million Palestinians living in diaspora right now around the world. Look past the Six-Day War in 1967. Look past the two intifadas. Let's talk about what happened in the last year. Even if we go down to the last year, where
Good.
Hamas, for example, didn't do anything in response, was first of all in 2021 and 2022 and 2023 during Ramadan, which is Muslims' holiest month. We're fasting sunrise, sundown. Israel, the IDF, attacks Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, every single year. Not just these last 3 years, but I'm giving you these last 3 years as an example. They bombed Gaza in 2021 during Ramadan. They bombed Gaza again in 2022 during Ramadan. This last summer we saw the massacre that occurred in Jenin refugee camp. Okay? They
Yeah.
did the same exact thing 10 years ago in Jenin refugee camp, where they cut the water lines, they destroyed homes, they destroyed the mosque, they destroyed the schools, they killed so many people, and you didn't get a response. How many different attacks need to occur against the Palestinians before you expect them to not respond anymore? How do you expect 2+ months of bombing, 61, 62 days of bombing, carpet bombing Gaza, and you're not going to get a response? And we have seen the same thing happen here. We saw the same thing happen in South Africa. We saw the same thing happen in different countries that have been colonized, and how the people got up and they revolted and they got their land back. They got their homes back. They got their lives back.
So this is good. Oh, I don't want to stop you. Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good.
Well, just while you were saying that, Anya, though, I think that we've got to think about that, right? Like in South Africa, it was 30 years. 30 years was that movement. 30 years, right? And it was the exact right of apartheid, of resisting, of right. I mean, this is why Nelson Mandela was actually put in jail and ultimately, thankfully, released, right? But that's what I think. What I want us to really start to let sink in. So when we talk about perseverance and we talk about endurance, and I appreciate you sort of moving us into this. Right, like even we think about too the civil rights movement, right? So this is 20 years of campaigning, right? Campaigns that would last 6 months, that would last, right? Sit-ins that would last months, the bus boycott, months, right? So really thinking about what does it mean to persevere? What does it mean to have endurance? And I think this is when Palestine can speak to us about hope. Palestinians can speak to us about hope, because perseverance itself, right, is continued effort, right? Continued effort to achieve something despite difficulty, right? Despite discomfort, despite being, in conditions that are hard, right? Like continuing, not only hard, but like honestly mortifying, horrifying. And this is right. I look at what's happening right now in Gaza, and I'm thinking, whoa, like what were the kind of perseverance, the kind of faith. And this is the other thing, right? Like the way in which faith then becomes a tool in this process to keep the people going, right? I mean, Rania, anything do you want to say about just on that note of persevering?
Yeah, I think Gaza has shown the world multiple times before what's happening now, how much faith, how much perseverance, how much resilience that they have. How the people of Gaza grow up to have that much resilience in their lives, seeing the most atrocious things that you could ever experience, right? But I also think, going back to what we started with is like, how the people here, white people here, white allies here that have just started joining the movement, not to diminish you joining us and helping us and raising our voices, is, that, okay, it's been 2 months and you're starting to lose hope, but why? You see Martez posting every single day the atrocities he's seeing. You see Bisan posting every single day about everything that she's going through. You saw how Plestia lived through almost the whole 60 days of this war and then left because her family was begging for their safety. You can see how Wa'il al-Dahduh from Al Jazeera, how he has pushed through. His family was killed. his wife and his daughter and his son were killed in an airstrike, and yet he comes to work in Gaza every day, despite the numerous threats against his life from before they killed his family to now. Every single day they threaten his life. And we, sitting here in the comfort of our homes in the United States, are too tired. We've lost hope. We can't see the end in sight. Why? If they haven't lost the hope and they're still begging us to keep, why are you saying that you've lost hope? You don't know how much hope is left. What is that actually going to do? Not just for Palestinians, but for your own cause. You know, whether you are LGBTQ plus, whether you are a black person or a person of color, it does not matter. If you can't make it through the 60 days and you're saying what hope do we have, then what does that mean for your own movement at the end of the day? What does that mean for your own people group? How much of your own trauma can you handle? Palestinians have been fighting this battle for 75 years, and we're going to continue to fight every single day of our lives. Because that's how we've been raised. That's how our parents before us have been raised, our grandparents, the generations before us have been raised, and we pass that along. And that's why when we see the people that have had to be forced out of their homes from the north to the south, and the people that were living in the south of Gaza have opened their homes so willingly, so mercifully, they just open their homes to people they don't know. There's 30 to 50 people living in different apartment complexes, in the tiny little units, because that is what the people of Gaza have always known for their whole lives, and they're going to continue to keep doing. It doesn't
So
matter if they don't have food. It doesn't matter that they didn't have water.
yes,
They're going
yes.
to keep doing that.
So this is the thing though, Rania, is so when we think about perseverance, right? Perseverance is like the effort, right? Is the effort. So choosing to continue, right? Endurance is actually having the capacity, like in your body, to be able to go on, right? Physically to be able to endure, to withstand, right? To have the fortitude and the resiliency, the toughness to be able to do it. And there's a way in which, right, if we think about you in this, you talked about this, right? In your body as a Palestinian, this is something that you know, like on a cellular level, what it is to not give up. And this is the thing that I want to mention again when we think about white supremacy culture and when we think about white privilege. And I want to say this to those of you who are watching who are white people like me, right? We have been brainwashed to believe that life is supposed to be easy. It is not easy for the majority of this world. For the majority of this world, right? There is poverty. There is sickness, there is war at the hands of Western European colonizers, right? We are complicit in that. And we get to sit here and choose if we want to watch or if we don't, if we want to post or if we don't, if we want to speak up or if we don't. And what I am asking you, right, is that you, in listening to Rania's story and watching these posts, right, you become a part of this. Right? You open your heart, you open your mind, you do the research, and you understand that you're being given an opportunity to learn from Palestinians and to stand with Palestinians right now in this genocide. Now, there have been other movements at other times, other people, right? When Black Lives Matter, right? When we saw George Floyd and everything that was happening during the 2020s, right? That was what was acute right then. It was time for us to stand up in solidarity, then white people, right? We needed to stand up because silence was meant that we were complicit. That right now is the same thing that is happening. So it's so important that we learn to move beyond what our white supremacy culture is telling us we deserve, to be comfortable, to be complacent, right? And we allow ourselves to experience this secondary trauma. We expose ourselves to this, to learn to hold space, because when we do, we will then grow the capacity to be able to hold more space and to open our heart more and to fight for liberty, to fight for liberation, to fight for justice against these colonial powers. Rania, tell me, is there anything else? Because our time is coming to a close tonight. Tell me, is there anything else that you feel like you want to say this evening? I mean, your words have been so powerful, like so palpable, genuinely. Is there anything that you feel like you want to say to any of us about about what you've been experiencing recently, about what we need to hear, about what we need to, a call to action. What can we do, right? Anything that you feel like you also want to say tonight.
Yeah. Well, first I want to thank everyone that has been on the live and for listening to us, and anyone that might watch this video later at another time or anything. But I think that it's important for us to look at the people on the ground in Gaza daily. Don't turn away from their videos. Don't turn away from what they're asking for us to do. Find the reputable organization that you can trust that can help the people of Gaza. I know not much aid at all is really getting in right now, but don't say, well, nothing's getting in right now. When you go to make a donation, say, when the time comes and they are able to get it in, they're going to get it in, and people need this, and we need to make sure that we have our mobilization ready so that people have the help that they need, right? We have kids starving to death. We have diseases going rampant in Gaza right now. I want anyone who questions, what can I do? Think about Hisham, who was one of the students that was not killed, thank God, but shot in Vermont, and he's now paralyzed. And yet he still left the hospital with a smile on his face, and he tells the world, it's okay. It's not okay. But what happened to me has allowed people to hear more about Palestinian stories, to hear more about Palestinian voices. Do not lose the hope. And when you think that you're losing hope at all, for whatever reason, go back, watch the videos in Gaza. Don't turn your phone off. Don't just say, I can't do it anymore. I can't. No, because that's exactly how they will win, is when we stop posting, we stop calling, find the local organizing group in your neighborhood, in your city, in your town, whatever it is. Find them, join their groups, go to different teach-ins. The universities all around us have different SJP, the Students for Justice in Palestine organizations, the Muslim Student Associations, different groups on campus. It doesn't even have to be a Palestinian organization that's organizing for Palestine. Go to these events, learn more, watch movies, watch the videos that people are posting. You have me as a contact. You have Dr. Rawson as a contact. There's other people that you can contact to learn more information. Go to Palestine Academy. Look at what they're posting to learn more about the history. There's so many ways for you to get involved and be active. And I am a firm believer in posting every single day. Post on your social media. Use your voice. Don't say it's not going to work, because it is working. Join the boycotts. Boycott McDonald's. Boycott Starbucks. Boycott Disney. All these things are helping. It's working. Starbucks has been reporting that they're losing sales, that they're having to close down stores. It is working. McDonald's is saying the same exact thing. That's why you see so many more Starbucks advertisements on your phone popping up on TikTok, on Instagram, whatever, because they're losing. Don't give up. Don't lose the hope. Keep, talk to a Palestinian, hear their stories, talk to, reach out to anyone that you know that's talking about Palestine, whether a Palestinian or not, if it's a white person, if it's not, I don't care who it is, but talk to them, see the side. Don't just rely on CNN and Fox News to get your news, because they're lying to you. They are lying to you. We know that they're lying to you. There's so many resources out there for you. Use your voice, use your, platforms. I don't care if you have 5 followers, if you have 1,000 followers, use your voice, use your platform for good. Start spreading the word and help share the stories of Palestinians.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. One of the things that are going to discuss on the next live, right? So tonight we've talked about hope, right? Do not lose hope. Do not give up, right? Do not stop. What we're going to talk about next week is peace, because, right, I think a lot of us have been seeing people talk about protecting their peace. And so tonight, as we were looking at that sort of the white privilege of believing that we deserve comfort, or we expect comfort, we're going to go a little bit deeper into that next week and talk about what that really means, preserving our peace, and what it looks like to take care of ourselves during this time. I think it is really, really, really important that as much as we may feel like we are losing hope, that this is too much to understand, right? That this is traumatizing to us. I really encourage you to continue to be present, to continue to listen, to continue to stand in solidarity and expose yourself, because endurance, perseverance, hope is a muscle, and it needs to be flexed, right? And so the more that we have exposure, the more that we listen, the more that we engage, the more we will build our capacity to be able to do this work, and we can learn from the stories and the lives and the hope that we're seeing come out of Palestine and out of Palestinians. Yeah. Okay. Rania, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Well, I mean, we're kind of having each other on this conversation. I mean, I
Yeah.
know I'm facilitating it, but yeah. I mean, there's so much more. I feel like we could say, but we've been here almost an hour together. And yeah, maybe next time I can also thank you, Ash. Maybe next time also I can learn how to. Yay! I can learn how to field questions, and we can also have questions at some point. Stay tuned for next week when Dr. Russin learns more about technology. Um, oh, thank you, Lucy, so much. I really appreciate you all being here. Again, we'll continue to do this. We'll continue to meet over the next 4 weeks of Advent. And I guess maybe one other thing that I want to say is we are going to talk a little bit more about Jesus and about this time, right? One of the things that I mentioned in coming in is that that actually Palestine is the birthplace really of Christianity, and so really thinking about then really thinking about what's happening in Palestine and where would Jesus stand, where would Jesus be, and what would Jesus do. And so I really, we're going to take some more time to look into that and to think about that. And even the ways that Jesus, who was actually, right, he was a pedagogue of the oppressed, right? He was anti-empire. Where would he, right? What would he say? And what would he believe right now? Anyway, okay, we'll keep talking. We'll keep doing the work. Thank you all so much for being here.